Leaders Live, where I get the chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas.
Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. I am George Socha, Senior Vice President of Brand Awareness at Reveal. Each Friday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern, I host an episode of eDiscovery Leaders Live where I get a chance to chat with leaders in eDiscovery and related areas. Past episodes are available on the Reveal website. Go to revealdata.com, select Resources, then select eDiscovery Leaders Live. This week is a reprise session. Last year, we attempted to have a discussion with David Yerich, who is the director of eDiscovery at UnitedHealth Group. We got started, but we ran into technical challenges and we were never able to fully finish it. We managed to make the schedules work. David is back with us today. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome David back. Again, David is the director of eDiscovery at UnitedHealth Group. David.
George, great to be back. This time I've got my fingers crossed. I knocked on wood. I think technology-wise we should be stable.
We will be stable as soon as Deja brings you up on the screen. There we go.
I like the disembodied voice thing. I could have done so much with that.
Now, we could do the tipping coffee cup and have you go dark on us.
We could here, yeah, but let's show the people now that we mentioned it. Watch as I raise the coffee cup. I can control the light. Isn't that amazing?
You have powers above and beyond those of any other guest we've had on this show.
It took me like minutes to configure the camera to not work properly. So yeah, but it is great to be back.
Yeah. So I'd like to dive right in. We got a couple possible things to cover, and one of the areas that is a vexing challenge for folks across the eDiscovery spectrum, whether they are at service providers, law firms, or as you are in a corporation, what do you do with Office 365? What are your thoughts, words of wisdom, warnings?
Oh boy, warnings is almost the better place to start. As far as productivity tools, it's pretty fantastic. Every week, new features roll out. Not quite every week, but pretty close. There's new ways to communicate, both internally and externally. There's great ways to collaborate. You can store data in multiple places. What is not to like about Office 365?
I think that's probably coming, isn't it?
Maybe if your job is to collect and preserve the data that is stored in Office 365, you're getting a little bit more heartburn than you are joy currently. Office 365 is truly an evolving product. It has a lot of functionality that can be turned on or off. Default may be on. And there's different ways that organizations might want to use it. And when you're on the preserving, collecting, searching end of that data, it really requires a lot more attention than maybe your old email did, and certainly your file shares did. I think the current one for me, and I always have to say that while I work at UnitedHealth Group, these are my opinions and not those of my organization. So please don't write them and say David said that UHG did this, because no, this is just me talking. The biggest one I guess I would say right now is Microsoft's version, and I use version as a pun, of versions. So if you put somebody on a preservation to keep their data, you may find that you have copies of documents they were working on every 8 minutes. And those copies are sitting there. And then, of course, when somebody mails a link now, because or team chats a link, you don't mail the document as an attachment anymore, you link it. Well, that link is almost always to the current document. It doesn't go to the one that was sent. So now you have a case where you have lots of versions of documents potentially stored if you went down that path with preservation, and you have a link, but that link is going to bring you to today's document if you're able to simply collect it. But when you go to collect that, if you're only grab the mailbox, you're not going to be getting those documents because those are stored probably in your team site or on somebody's OneDrive.
And
So,
this is a broader problem, isn't it? It's not just limited to O365. Other platforms have the same type of challenge, don't they?
absolutely. I mean, with the Google Docs platform or whatever, I forget the proper name for that one today. They have that. We used to have this, if George, you've been in this industry longer than me, but stubbing was a word I think we used to despise when certain email archive platforms gave you a stub to the document and you couldn't get it back. So you're right. It's an old problem. It does have some different flavors this time. And because it's hosted, it's not on premise. And that means that the tools that are going to need to get access to this have to have the right credentials. And if those tools aren't on premise and they're with perhaps your service provider, then you've got to provide security credentials in order to get to that data. And that in this world, security is very different than it might have been back in the stubbing days when things were on-prem. So I'll stop there. That's just one example of some of the nuances to that tool.
So one of the challenges is trying to get to the version you really want instead of the current version. Is there an easy path there? And if there's not an easy path, what do people try to do?
So you may not be able to get to the version you want if you say wanted a version, because that version may not exist. You simply could have put people on hold long after those documents are no longer there. And so what you have is an email that looks like it goes to a document, but when you retrieve that document, eventually when you find it, if it's still there, it turns out that it's very different than the document that was referenced because it's been maybe a couple months, a year, and that's changed dramatically, and the hold only went out last week. The issues that are around this, I think it's one of requesting parties and producing parties understanding the limitations to this technology. It is not the panacea, the easy button where everything simply works. It's going to create a lot more questions. And just to stay on the email example, email was almost a perfect eDiscovery tool. I know we struggled in the beginning very mightily with it, but when you think about it, it's a time capsule. You have both the message about the document and the document attached, and it's put in a nice little wrapper and all the metadata stored. It was really great. This has kind of taken that apart, and now you have a message, but you don't have the document, and the document may not be one that can be retrieved for very valid reasons.
So one possibility is you got the message, the document can't be retrieved, it's not there. Another possibility, I suppose, is you've got the message and you're very lucky and the document you have is the version you want. Another, at least theoretical possibility, but tell me whether this is even so, is that you have the message and you have access to multiple versions of the document. First, does that even happen?
It absolutely, within the Compliance Center and within the Microsoft Office 365 can happen. You could have thousands of versions of a document.
So when you have that email message and then up to thousands of versions of a document, is there any ready way to figure out how to tie that message with the version that you care about?
Not that we have been made aware of. We've reached out, obviously, to Microsoft on this. We've talked to many service providers. There are promising possible methodologies, but there is no current solution that we're aware of that will solve for this problem.
So it sounds as if, from what you said earlier, A, of course, this is a technical challenge, but B, it's also a lawyering challenge, because the attorneys on both sides need to become sufficiently educated that they recognize what the challenge is, how insurmountable it is, and what their expectations ought to then be if they're going to have reasonable expectations.
I think that was very well said, George. And it really, the expectations of reasonableness are going to be very important. And it's going to be hard because people, over a decade of email collections have gotten very used to having certain things work a certain way. And it just simply isn't the case anymore with Office 365 and some of the other platforms. Although for most corporations, I think 365 is the primary tool that they seem to be migrating to. So that's the one that I'm far more familiar with.
So the current version of stubbing is a challenge. What other major issues are folks likely to run into when eDiscovery and O365 collide?
So another challenge that people might have is that the way messages are stored, I guess I would say that for a while now, people have been saving their instant messages. When you get an instant message, though, in the 365 environment, depending upon where it came from, it might be stored in a user's mailbox, in a hidden folder. So the user sees everything in this beautiful communication server window, and it looks really nice, and there's all this indentation, and you can read it and sort it. But for eDiscovery purposes, to grab that message is actually sitting as an individual email file in a hidden folder in the user's mailbox. So I say, hello, George, and that's one email. And you respond, Dave, great to hear from you. And that's another email. And then in between, I might have some other conversations going. And these are all just stacking up as individual files that then have to be rethreaded. So it's similar to issues that we've seen with text messaging on mobile devices, but much broader in scale, plus the links to the documents in there. And if you have a team site, which is a version of a SharePoint site, but it has communication features which are facilitated through a kind of a hidden mailbox that people don't realize, then those messages are going to be stored within that team site. And the latest and greatest that we're seeing that people are starting to look at using is allowing guest access into team sites. So George, you wanted to email me and we're going to work on a quick project. We get you guest access, and now you can actually communicate with the people on the team inside our organization from a different organization. And then those messages are going to be captured, but you're just an email address. Now you have to have authentication and different ways to make sure that we want you in the environment and that you agree to things. But at the end of the day, you're not a full employee, and therefore we don't have the normal history and background and all that information we might want to have if you were. So thought has to go into how do we preserve, capture, and know who came in and put these messages there, because 5 years from now, we gather this for eDiscovery, and there's a email address that appears kind of cryptic because it doesn't make a lot of sense. And it turns out, it was part of this project and it was an external user coming in, but how are you going to know who that is?
And I assume the platform is not, O365 is not designed to capture and retain that information, making this convenient for you.
It captures the email address. And it's up to you as the collector of the information then to figure out how to put that email address and make it a custodian. So these are some of the things that are just coming up, and there will be more, and they evolve.
So it sounds as if there are two challenges in what you just talked about. One is on the counterpart, the analog, if you will, to email threading. And if when you're trying to deal with that with chat messages, that's like threading squared. Now when you move into O365, that's like threading to the third or the fourth or the fifth power in terms of its complexity and how to deal with it.
No, absolutely. And if you were to send the document, not a link, the document isn't stored in that folder. It's not an attachment to that. It's stored in a different location. So for folks who are, early on their journey or maybe through their journey, but haven't had a litigation event or some need to look at the data, give yourself some extra time.
And then the second part is it sounds like entity extraction becomes even more important.
Yeah, it's interesting because I know you're very versed in analytics, and I will put you more so than myself. And when we talk about an entity, in this case, it would be the individual. It could be the organization that individual worked with. It is a very basic level, and that's not an entity extraction that we normally have a difficulty with, because normally these were communications between, people who were known, where the new methodology will allow a lot wider participation, which again, I don't want to overlook the fact of the power of these tools. You can very quickly bring lots of people to communicate in real time and not have the barriers we've had before. Absolutely great for business and very exciting. And as a technology person, I get excited about it, but it's always tempered these days because I know that at some point, team might have to be preserving and collecting this information.
And in some ways, it's the same story we have seen each of us throughout our entire journeys through eDiscovery of great new technology for the users, but on the eDiscovery side, we're scrambling to catch up.
It does that. That's, again, you always summarize so well, and that is how it feels today. It's almost like it felt, a decade ago, trying to capture what was going on then.
Well, to switch gears slightly and how it feels now versus how it felt a decade ago, one of the topics that keeps coming up and has been coming up since as long as I can remember in eDiscovery is the topic of industry consolidation. What are you seeing happen?
It's okay. Watch, I gotta do my magic trick so I can hold on one second.
Perfect.
There we go. The consolidation is continuing at an incredible pace. The number of providers in the service providers who do either hosting, processing, or document review is shrinking as they are consumed or joining forces with other providers to get a larger footprint. So you could have providers who you've worked with for a couple of years now, and within the last 2 years, maybe they've actually been merged twice. It happened at such a rapid rate. So I think that we are going to get down to much fewer overall provider choices in the future. It's just not going to have the same level of people entering the market, even though the barriers to entry went down for so long for people as the technology to host, process, and the knowledge base got better and people were more aware and you could hire more employees, which is always a struggle. But now rising cost of doing business, your needs to have larger insurance policies, your needs on having security that's maintained at the highest levels constantly is very much forcing a need for smaller players to join forces in order to get the economies of scale.
So this ongoing consolidation must, for someone in your position, both present challenges and offer advantages. Let's start with the challenges.
The biggest challenge for, I think, not just our organization, but most, is that eDiscovery and document review is a people business. You need intelligent people to work with, to review the documents, to make proper decisions, to navigate thorny situations that come up maybe with outside counsel or internal if budgets aren't quite in alignment or we're not meeting time schedules, those types of things. Those are soft skills. And when you get a team that you work with for a long time, outside counsel has worked with them, it just gels well and you get great synergistic outputs and everything's good. Now you have a merger and maybe the person who you worked with is not looking to stay in that same role. Maybe now that the company's bigger, they have more opportunity for promotion. They can go from being a case manager up to a department manager, something of that level. And absolutely people should move on, and they have a lot more opportunity to move up in a bigger organization than they did at a smaller organization. And people are stickier. Moving from one organization to another takes a lot more effort than switching roles within an organization. So the first thing that you notice after a merger is people who you really liked because they were excellent, they did great work. Well, that's recognized. Now they have opportunities, so they move on. So you have disruption there. And that people disruption, I think, is the issue that happens.
And the advantages, if any?
No, the advantages are there also because a lot of the bigger organizations can scale. So if you have review needs that grow suddenly, the smaller organization may not have had the infrastructure requirements and could not quickly get scaled up to meet a particular need that was going to be transitory, as most discovery is. It comes and then it goes, where a large organization can support a larger burst capacity and have that happen, as well as on the processing side and all the people who have to do the productions. They can pull some additional resources. The benches are deeper, so they're in scaling up in more technology and potentially better technology or better experts at the existing technology are all benefits of a merger.
So if you pull out your crystal ball, gaze into it murkily as we do, what does the future of this industry look like?
I'm going to see if my Surface dial will work as a crystal ball.
I'm sure it will, as well as any other will.
Pretty opaque. I'm not seeing a lot. No, I guess to me the future is going to be fewer providers. I would say that's going to probably consolidate both the talent and the technology. And in the meantime, I think there'll be less choice, less options. long term, I think that there will be a outcome that's probably better because the processes and technologies will grow and they will become standardized. So it's both bad. In the first part, I think you lose. And then in the long term, I think that we'll see the growth in the ability to service more data in different ways.
And I wonder too whether we've had this sort of cycle several times now in the eDiscovery space where it feels like the number of providers has shrunk, that there's been a huge amount of consolidation, and then out of nowhere, apparently out of nowhere, we get a new wave of providers appearing, bringing us something different to the table so that they've got an edge that the older ones might not have or might need to adapt to offer as well. What do you think about the possibility of that happening again?
That's a great question. So, I mean, I always try to kind of think about it. So we had bespoke providers who had their own developed technology. Then a provider with a kind of uniform platform took over that was distributed. So instead of a single huge thing, we went to a distributed platform that everybody could get on. That was a little bit disrupted by some hosting providers who went back to bespoke, but in a hosted model. I don't know that that model got the traction that the previous model did. It's out there, it's viable, and it's got a use case, but it didn't grow from what I've seen. But now we're taking the distributed model, we're consolidating it back to a bespoke model in a hosted environment. So it's quite the interesting change. Will we see a proliferation? If it doesn't work, I think the answer is absolutely yes. It depends on whether or not the new model is able to overcome the deficiencies of the current model, add additional benefits, either in better pricing, better service, better technology. And then as technology keeps changing, that's going to force something else. So I don't know if we will. If I circle back though to the cost of doing business, if we look at the security requirements, the insurance requirements, I don't know that we're going to see a huge proliferation of new vendors, because I think the cost of entry has gone up. It's not about so much the technology today and getting that. It's a lot more about customer acquisition costs and overall, like I've mentioned too many times here, just insurance and not licensing, but insurance and the cost related to doing business with larger organizations.
So with these changing emphases on factors, there must also be a changing dynamic in that, if you will, triangle or whatever it is relationship, we'll use a triangle for these purposes, between corporations, who are by and large the consumers of all of this, law firms, and service providers. So that relationship must be changing yet again, no?
It's definitely for larger corporations. It has not changed as far as I thought the pendulum was going to swing on the owner of the. If we look at the segment between the service provider and the law firm, I still see and hear from peers a lot of corporations that are relying on their law firms to do a great deal of the work. There has been huge growth for some corporations in taking more control of that, but it's still very well evenly distributed. When I talk to peer companies about how they've approached it, the law firms have more options with the hosted environment to actually offer the review and processing services if they chose, because they don't have to manage that anymore. And if you will, the corporation service provider, that's still, I think there's still a lot of green space in there. It's easier for me to say in my ideal world, I think the corporation benefits hugely from controlling both the service provider and the law firm, because that gives you visibility in the entire process. It also gives you the ability to manage the overall productivity. You can see what tools are being used. So I'm a huge advocate for for corporations having direct control over the service providers, and then telling the law firms, not please, but you need to use these service providers. And we've already contracted, and that allows you to look at it. So back to the triangle, it's still a triangle. I guess I thought it will always be a triangle, but if it started that looks kind of weird. But I thought it was going to bend more. I thought there would have been almost a 4-point split at some point, like it would be so distorted. But that triangle stands stronger than, in my opinion, than I would have expected it to after all these years.
For a corporation to take advantage of the opportunity to control both the law firm side and the service provider side, rather than run through, for example, a law firm who then controls the service provider, it seems to me the corporation has to have a certain threshold level of capabilities internally. No?
Absolutely. If you're going to play the role, you have to have the capabilities. Interestingly, though, I've seen, comparatively very small corporations bring in a single person or two people and do a fantastic job of that capability. It doesn't require an enormous litigation footprint in order to justify it. A single hire, frankly, or a hire of two people might be more than sufficient for many corporations to see a return on investment from those hires to beyond justify making that position. But they do have to have the capability. And sadly, it's not unexpected because law firms are, one of those things we started the conversation about was talking about talent. And in a law firm, you start as a 1L, or not 1L, you start as a first-year associate, and maybe after 7 to 8 years, 10 years now, you become partner. But during that time period, you're going to be rotated to different groups. You're going to have different experiences. You're not necessarily going to have the same client the entire time. And a lot of people may opt out of that life after a certain point. But what we know is that there's going to be another group of first-year associates next year. Well, in the discovery space, most of the work of the discovery is happening between that first and third year associate level that we see. There can be senior associates depending upon what the matter is. But point being that at the end of the day, this isn't a stable area where you're, as a corporation, going to be working with the same people on your discovery matters. In some of our longer lasting cases, I've seen 3 sets of associates run through because they've simply either moved on to partner or they moved out or they rotated into a different practice area. At the same time, if we're really lucky, at one of our vendors or service providers, we've had the same person working on the case or the same team on that case. Well, we've gone through all those associates. And it's truly the service provider doing the document hosting and review that has the most knowledge. And you'd think it would be the law firm, but these are very detailed day-to-day interactions about decisions on relevance, what was, what isn't, coding, all of those things. And that historic knowledge is in your documentation, but it's oftentimes with your service provider, not with your law firms. And the design of the law firm isn't likely to change if it hasn't changed in this many years. So
it does suggest, though, that more far-sighted law firms could be looking to try to figure out how they can adapt their internal advancement structures, their compensation structures, and the like, so as to keep some highly talented people focused on the eDiscovery functions in a way to better serve the corporations so that those law firms don't then lose yet more work to service providers. Or am I missing something there?
No, you're right. And there have been several individuals in this field who have succeeded in there, but not compared to the number of law firms. It's very small versus overall number of law firms. And lawyers may not like technology. Some of the best lawyers simply may not like technology. So you've got to get the right lawyer who wants to do that. And it is very hard. If you had a path to be partner, I don't know too many people who made partner on eDiscovery. It certainly has happened and it's possible, but for career advancement, I don't know that it's that strong. And if you wanted to talk about non-transferable skills, if you were that person at the law firm and either that law firm merges, we're seeing a lot of consolidations in the legal space too, you might find yourself unable to move to another location. So I totally agree with you, George. It's doable, it's possible. Long-sightedness would do it. I don't know if it would happen on the paralegal or the professional non-lawyering direct path to partner, and it should happen. And who I think would benefit most are the clients, frankly, because having the right skill level from your law firm is huge, and that makes everything go great. If not, then having a service provider who can augment that is great. What I would never kind of expect is a corporation or an entity that has very little litigation, but once you have litigation, you need eDiscovery. It's guaranteed. How are they going to get the expertise they need, get on the ground running. They're going to need to get it from their law firm or from a service provider, and there's still a disconnect there, which is a great problem to be solved. And I think with all the consolidation in the industry, maybe that's one of the things that will come back and look better in a few years.
I think, and I know we need to let you go in a second here because you've got a hard stop. I think in what you just said, for those people at law firms and service providers who are listening carefully, there are some possibilities there that don't seem to be well exploited yet. And I'll let people go back and listen to try to figure out what those are. David, thank you very much for joining us yet again. This time we were able to make it through uninterrupted, which was great. David Yerich is Director of eDiscovery at UnitedHealth Group. I am George Socha. This has been eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. Thank you all for joining us today, and please join us again next week, Friday, November 12th, when our guest will be Dan Regard of IDS. David, thank you very much.
Thanks, George.